Okay. So today I will simply introduce you to the book of Ruth. Um, you should have read it through once just to have an idea. No homework for today, right? This was just for you to get an overview so you understand what I'm talking about. Next time, I'm going to say it now, I will ask you to do a reading assignment on Ruth chapters 1 to 2, 1 and 2. Okay? And I'll remind you at the end also. All right, great. Well, let me maybe ask a few of you any impressions about the book that you had. Just a quick, maybe anyone want to say anything interesting? Okay, Kestenbaum, go ahead.
Well, I know the topic is Hebrew goddesses, so this might sound redundant, but definitely just having a female protagonist, and not just a female protagonist, but one that is incredibly, it sounds cliche, but independent, making her own choices, but not just making her own choices, going against the narrative, right? The fact that she said, even though it would be easier if I leave, nonetheless, I'm going to stay and I'm going to face adversity. That's like a really powerful image of a female biblical character that remains just as relevant today and just as groundbreaking today as it was when this happened.
Yeah, this is really an example of a woman who runs against the grain in terms of not only biblical culture, but patriarchal culture in general, right? She is extremely strong-willed, right? This is really an empowered woman. I mean, and we'll look at some of these details, right? We're going to look at how she really stands out, right? By the way, and we'll talk about this, but she's described actually, unlike most biblical texts, when they talk about, interesting women, they always talk about them as beautiful. She is described as strong. No mention of her beauty, but her strength really kind of stands out for this narrator, right? So we're gonna see this. Stage, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I want to say I always enjoy what's your name, mate? Kestenbaum. I
Estimate.
always enjoy I always enjoy your feminist comments. Um, on my part, however, I did enjoy. Wait a minute, you said only one and two. Can I go off the text and say four?
Just in
Chapter.
general, anything
Okay.
that struck you in
Well, what I enjoyed very much is the fact that at the end, she becomes a great grandmother to David, who is the forefather of the Christ. I think and I wrote that in what's called in one of the things, essays, whatever you want to call them. That was quite a privilege uh, that was quite a privilege from the perspective of mine and of course everybody else's. Uh, Being a Moabitess and um, becoming a foremother of the Christ. I just thought, I mean, she's given so much she's given her family, she's given her whatever wealth she had, she's given everything, her parents, and she went, but I never understood why she went with Naomi, because of some sort of love that's rare between the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was very blessed
So
for
yes,
doing that.
you make a really interesting comment, which I hope we can deal with when we do the Gospels. But the notion that there are four women that are quoted as part of Jesus's genealogy, and she's one of them. We have Bathsheba, Tamar, Rahab, who in the genealogy in the New Testament, Rahab is actually seen to be the mother of Boaz. So it's interesting. This is an additional detail. I wonder if the Talmud mentions anything about that, right? I'd be curious. So whoever has some Jewish background, can you check whether there's a tradition in Judaism that Rahab was the mother of Boaz or grandmother or some connected? I'm very curious. In the New Testament, in the Gospels, she's cited as actually the mother of Boaz. So we have these four foreign women or four problematic women. We have a Canaanite, two Canaanites. We have a Moabite, and we have Bathsheba, who is a very problematic position, right? So this says a lot, I think. I mean, we'll talk about this when we do the Gospels, but this says a lot about, I think, the personality of Jesus, right? To have all of these kind of marginalized women, and perhaps it says a lot, it explains a lot his attitude towards women, which we should study. We really should. I'm still working on the gospel, so I don't know yet what I'm gonna do, but this is really an interesting detail, which I feel maybe we should talk about that. Okay, great. Anything else? Anybody else want to jump in and say any impressions that they had? Okay. All right, let's get into the introduction, right? So there's a great commentary. If you want to go deeper, the best one is Tamara Eskenazi, and simply the commentary, I think it's called the JPS Bible Commentary. So it's the JPS, oh my God, it translated to UPS. JPS Bible Commentary. This is the commentary published by the Jewish Publication Society. Wait, I'm trying to look. Yeah, that's it. And it's simply the Book of Ruth, right? Okay. Okay, Kestenbaum, thank you. I knew I could count on one of you to to give me some inside information, right? Interesting, right? So I'd be curious, but apparently there isn't any reference to Rahab, right? As Kestenbaum is saying. So if you want to go deeper, this is an amazing commentary. I got a lot of my information from that commentary, actually. And I actually like her approach. Her approach is not so much about, she's not really studying like we will, gender relations and so forth, but she's talking more about the book as a subversive text, written in reaction to the kind of ongoing trend of xenophobia and ethnocentrism that we see in the Hebrew culture, in the biblical culture, right? So make sure you write this down. This is a very important point that Eskenazi makes, right, in her book. That's her thesis, that this book is really written as a subversive text against the ongoing traditions of exclusion, separation from Gentiles, right, in order to preserve the integrity of the Jewish people. Right, there is really, and I'm going to give you the timeline of this kind of attitude of exclusion, attitude of separation, which is comes very early. Actually, interestingly, it comes with Moses, not with Abraham, right? Abraham is a very interesting figure because he is extremely inclusive. Remember I told you this story about the tent with the 4 open sides, right? Abraham was a very different mentality, right, when we are with Abraham than when we become with Moses, Joshua, the attitude of conquest that comes later on, right? So it's as early as Moses, but not earlier, right? It's a much more inclusive approach with Abraham. So let me give you a little bit some of these moments of xenophobia, right? So you have the earliest is really when it's found in Deuteronomy, right? So I'm going to write you the quote, Deuteronomy 23:4-7. Right, this is a command that is given to the Israelites shortly after entering the land. It says this, right? No Moabite will be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. It goes into details up until the 10th generation, forever. Right? The law is really saying this is a lasting ordinance for never. Right? And this is the reason that is cited in this text is that when the Hebrews, if you know a little bit of the history, when they left the land of Egypt, when they were migrating from Egypt, they got stuck in the desert and they ran out of supplies, and they asked Moab, who was really a distant cousin, right? We know that the Moabites emerged from Lot, who was the nephew of Abraham, right? So this is family, right? So they asked Moab for supplies, and they refused, right? That's the first incident. Second incident, also told, I'm trying to see where it's told exactly, but we have another incident where as the Hebrews were about to enter the land, the Moabite women came, and they kind of seduced the men, right, and led them astray, and so it really messed up the whole plan in a way, right? So we have these two things, the Hebrew collective consciousness, right? When it thinks of Moab, it thinks of two things: lack of right nourishment, lack of hospitality, and the kind of whore mentality of the women, right? So this is the association. It's interesting that Ruth undoes both of these, right? She is the one feeding Naomi, right? And well, the part with the whore is a little dubious because she does have a kind of peculiar behavior with Boaz. We'll see. But these are the two things that Ruth, in a way, undoes, or the story is retold, right, in this narrative by Ruth. So great. So we have, right, these two. So this is the first incidence of exclusion, right? We know also, the Moabites already had a bad reputation because of the story with Lot's daughters, right? This is like goes back. It's really, so if you recall the story with Lot, right? So Abraham had a nephew called Lot. Lot went and moved to Sodom and Gomorrah. When the cities were destroyed, he escaped with his daughters. His daughters, thinking there was no one left in the world. I don't know how. I'm not getting that. I never understood why Lot's daughters thought they were the only ones left. But it must have been a massive catastrophe, right? That felt like it covered maybe a broader range than just Sodom and Gomorrah. And so they actually slept with their father, and out of that union came the Moabites, right? The nation of Moab. So already Moab doesn't have a great reputation, right, in the biblical text. The next instance of exclusion that you see in the Hebrew Bible is after the exile. So if you recall the history, right, when the Hebrews finally settled in the land, they stayed there a few hundred years, and then they were exiled to Babylon, and then they came back and started to rebuild Jerusalem and so forth. And at that moment, you have the texts of Ezra and Nehemiah. These are two officials who came to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple, and there is this instance in both texts where they realize that the Hebrews who have remained behind have intermarried with Moabites, among others, right? And so in order to cleanse the race, right, in order to protect the integrity of the Hebrews, which they feel is becoming kind of diluted or mixed, right, they order a collective divorce, right? Everyone needs to divorce their wives, including their Moabite wives. So it's a very harsh decree, which, by the way, there is a negative response to it. And so in the end, it's only the officials, the tribal leaders who do this kind of symbolically, right? But originally, they wanted everyone to get a divorce, right? So so we are really here in the Father's house, right? Like we were talking about before. So you have really this tradition of exclusion, of separation, not only from Moab, but from Gentiles in general, from the surrounding nations. And what Eskenazi is arguing, which is, I think, interesting, is that the book of Ruth was written as a reaction to that, right? In order to balance things out, right? Remember, wisdom literature is subversive literature, right? So it's always going to go against the grain. It's always going to pick a fight with the traditional views. So in addition, so I love this perspective by Eskenazi. I think it's great, but where I want to go is into this gender relations issues that we were talking about, and of course this notion of a feminist path to spirituality, right? We are looking at this book as we're looking at Ruth as one of the Hebrew goddesses, right? Meaning one of the powerful women who has paved the path of a typical towards a feminine a version of spirituality. She is part of our mother's house, like I said before, right? So if you recall last time, we did a kind of distinction between the father's house and the mother's house, right? I'll remind you what I mean by that. Father's house is the patriarchal mindset towards spirituality, which is prevalent, right, in the Hebrew Bible. But you also have in the Hebrew Bible the mother's house, right? You do have moments of kind kind of glimpses of another form of spirituality, which comes up in the text we're going to be studying, right? Which I call this is the spirituality which is prevalent in what I call the mother's house, which is a much more feminine approach to spirituality, right? So last time, remember, we distinguished father's house, mother's house. Let's go back. I'm going to go back and do the same distinctions, but I'm going to zoom in on Ruth, right? So number one, we're going to talk about divine metaphors. Number two, the sacred spaces. I think that's the titles I had. Number three, I'm going to add definition of holiness. Number four, rituals. Number five, commandments. Okay, so we're going to come to contrast again the father's house with what is taking place in the book of Ruth, right? And again, right, both are found in the Hebrew Bible, right? When I say the father's house, I don't mean the Hebrew Bible, right? Because the Hebrew Bible contains both houses, right? You have the father's house prevalent in the Hebrew Bible, but you also have moments of subversion where you have this kind of glimpse into the mother's house, right? Okay. By the way, where I got this reference, father's house, mother's house, right? The mother's house is mentioned in two texts, in Ruth and in the Song of Songs, right? And it's an unusual mention because in the Hebrew Bible in general, we talk about the woman going to the father's house or living in her father's house, right? So the allusion to the mother's house is seeming to be opening up a new dimension, right? Okay, so again, remember, I told you last time, let's start with the first one, divine metaphors. I can't spell metaphors. Did you notice that? Okay. No E at the end. Divine metaphors. Remember I told you last time, of course, prevalently in the Hebrew Bible, God is described as male. His pronouns are male, except in Genesis where his pronoun is plural, right? Maybe we should have stuck with that, right? That wouldn't have led us to think of God as strictly male, plural in the book of Genesis, right? Which remember is pre-patriarchal text. That's why you have this plural. But after that, mostly male. And God is mostly embodied as a kind of a military figure throughout the Torah, throughout the 5 books of Moses. He's fighting, right? And then he, in the prophets, he's more like the wounded lover, right? The bridegroom. So these are the two main metaphors for God in the Hebrew Bible. 5 books of Moses, he's a warrior. The prophets, he's a bridegroom, right? Prevalently male metaphors, right? So here you get to the book of Ruth, right? And you have this woman, which the narrator is going to, through certain clues, this narrator is going to depict her as one of the figures or one of, as the embodiment of the divine feminine, right? In other words, she's going to be depicted in a way that is normally reserved to depict God. And let me explain what I mean, right? The author does this as follows, right? There's an attribute of God, which in the Hebrew is chesed, right? Which means love, which basically means unconditional, unearned, undeserved love, right? That's really the kind of love we're talking about, right? This is what means chesed. Memorize this word chesed because I'm going to be talking about it over and over again. So learn this Hebrew word. So chesed predominantly in the Hebrew Bible is used to describe God, right? If you look at, for example, Psalm 26, I believe, Psalm 136, if you read that, you have 26 times chesed used to describe God, right? Now, when you turn to the book of Ruth, now that you've read the book, I'm curious, who is given this attribute in our book? Did anyone pay attention to this? Which, there's actually 2 persons given this attribute in the book of Ruth. Anybody know who they are? Anybody remember? And in the English, it would be translated loving kindness or kindness, right? Each time you see that word, that's chesed. That's the translation of chesed. Anybody remember? There's 4 times. Maybe we can go there together. I'm gonna, if no one has the reference, actually, let me wait. Anybody? Let me see if you can figure it out. 4 times you have the expression kindness. It's used to describe Two different people. Who? Okay, Granite, go ahead.
One of them is definitely Boaz.
Is it?
Oh, maybe not. Or maybe I misread that.
Boaz is saying it. Yes, Boaz is mentioning.
Oh, he's saying that. Okay, sorry. I misread that.
But he's not described as being a man of chesed, right? He mentions chesed. This is, you're probably looking at 310, right? That's where Boaz is talking. Let's go.
Oh, yeah. So he's talking to Ruth. And
Talking
so
to Ruth. And
yeah.
who and so okay, so first let's go back to the earlier versions, right? The first version, I'm going to write it down, is found in chapter 1 verse 8. Tell me who is the subject here of chesed. Who is the one doing the chesed in chapters 1 verse 8? Pierre-Antoine, go ahead.
Is it like God? Because like Naomi's talking to Oprah and Naomi talking about how like God may the Lord show kindness to you.
Exactly.
Like,
Right?
Yeah.
First time we see chesed in the book of Ruth, God. May God show you kindness, right? Okay, second time is 220. Who is this? Who is the one now?
It's also God.
Yep, also God. Very good. And now we get to the last version, which is 310. Who does chesed belong to now? Who is the subject of chesed now?
Now it's talking about Ruth.
Yeah, exactly, right? This is significant. This is not a little trivial detail, right? Chesed systematically used to describe God throughout the Hebrew Bible in our book, and then all of a sudden, paf, there is a shift, and now Ruth becomes the one who has this attribute, right? So there's a clear intention here, right, by the author to show us that this woman, we need to pay attention to her because she is the only one in the text. Not even Boaz reaches that level, right? She's the only one in the text who is given this divine attribute. In other words, she is a figure of the divine. She is an incarnation of this divine attribute, or an embodiment of the divine attribute, not of the divine. I'm not going to go there, right? We're not in Hinduism, right? Where God embodies, or Christianity, right? She is the embodiment, the incarnation of this divine attribute. This is why I see her as a figure of the divine feminine, right? Again, I want to be clear. I'm not saying she's God. I'm saying she is embodying in a powerful way, in a way that is unique, the divine attribute of chesed. She is in a way one of the figures of the divine feminine, right? That's how I see it. So this is very important. And it's shocking, right? That the woman that is picked, the only woman that is picked, or the only human being that is picked really with the attribute of chesed, is not only a woman, she's a Moabite woman. She's a foreigner, right? And you have to really ponder this. This is, if you're in the culture, this is shocking, right? Because the Moabites are supposed to be a kind of, a degenerate. Right? They're supposed to be a kind of degenerate people, with whorish women and inhospitable men, and they're seen as very inferior, right? And incestuous, we can add. Yes, Pierre-Antoine, thank you, right? And all of a sudden you have this foreign women, not Naomi, right, who is the Hebrew character. The foreigner becomes the one who represents God in the text, right? We have a very similar dynamic as we had between Cain and Abel, right? Cain, the firstborn, supposed to be recognized by God, and yet it's Abel, the lastborn, who is recognized, right? So God has a way of playing hide and seek with us, right? Oh, you think I'm here? Actually, I'm there, right? So this should let's stop on that a little bit. I want to stop on this. What we just talked about. What does this tell you about God, or about the concept of God that is being taught in this text right now? To have this attribute be given to the foreign woman. Let's stop on that and comment a little bit. What does this tell you about God, about the teaching on God, teaching on spirituality? Granite, go ahead.
I guess it shows you that God is not, like, yes, he's like kind of was first worshipped by the Israelites, I guess. but he's not sort of like only the God of the Israelites. Like he is, I guess, like he's the God of the whole world. He's like a universal God that anyone really can relate to, of any like religion, I guess,
Yeah.
or not religion, any ethnicity,
Absolutely.
So
Nicely
yeah.
put, right? This is typical of wisdom literature, right? God transcends the boundaries of Israel, right? God is found also in the nations. You also have people in the nations who are, when I say the nations, I mean whoever is not Jewish, whoever is not Hebrew, right? You have people there who are connected in a powerful way to the God of the Hebrews, right? There is already people worshiping or, outside. So yes, this tells us that God transcends the boundaries of Israel. He's not just the God of the Hebrews. He's the God of everyone in a way. Let's see, who else wants to comment on this? Pierre-Antoine, go ahead.
So I think like this is basically just saying that like God could use anybody. Like it's not limited to like gender, as people like suspect most of the time. Like God could use anybody that he wants. So like if he wants to use a woman to show like his unconditional, undeserving love, like he's gonna do it. So.
Very good, right? God pretty much can be embodied or expressed, right, through anybody. We have a similar saying in the New Testament where Jesus teaches at one point, the Spirit, right, meaning the Spirit of God, blows where it wills. This is a beautiful text in the Gospel of John, right, which we might study. It's saying that basically the Spirit in Hebrew, for those who know Hebrew, the Ruach, right, the Ruach HaElohim, the Spirit of God, blows where it will. Right, and he says this in the context of a conversation with a foreign woman. Right, he's talking to the celebrated Samaritan woman. So Jesus is speaking to a foreign woman and telling her the Spirit of God blows where it wills. And we have this exactly here in the book of Ruth, right? God is where he wants to be. Right, we don't have the monopoly on God, right? We don't have God is never my God. Right? Excellent. I think I saw Olivera. You want to say something too, Olivera?
It's pretty much everything said. There is no structure, it's more fluid.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I like that, right? God is fluid. We talk about today gender identity being fluid, but here we are seeing God is fluid. He flows where he wants to. He will pop up in this, foreign woman. He will pop up over here, right? And we can't really pinpoint and kind of, sit him down in one space, right? Very good. So this is an interesting detail. So let's go to the next one, the next point of contrast, right, which is the sacred spaces. Right, we talked about last time how Jerusalem, the temple, this was the main space of encounter with God. And now, of course, we are outside of the walls of Jerusalem in the fields during the barley harvest. We are either in the fields or on the threshing floor, right, where the grain is separated from the chaff, right, where you have... so these are the two places. And in a way, God is not found anymore in elevation on a mountain, right? God is found between people. Right, these moments of chesed, whether it's Ruth performing acts of chesed or Boaz eventually also performing acts of chesed, even though he's not explicitly mentioned like this, or Naomi also, right? God in a way becomes manifest through our actions. I want to stop on this because this is very typical of what I would call diaspora literature. I invented this. This expression. Let me explain what I mean by that. You have the literature which takes place in Jerusalem, in the official spaces, right? And then you have what I call diaspora literature, which takes place outside of the walls of Jerusalem and outside even of the land of Israel, right? Like Esther. And what is typical about diaspora literature is that God is not explicitly mentioned anymore. He's kind of in the background. This is very typical of Song of Songs, Esther, Ruth especially, right? So where is God, right? Well, what we're finding and what we will find more and more, God is between people. In other words, diaspora literature is not characterized anymore by God himself intervening, like in the book of Exodus, right? With a mighty arm I shall, right? Outstretched arm I shall save you, right? God is not intervening directly anymore, but God is still active through us. There's many people, sometimes they ask me, I wish we could have, why doesn't God anymore reveal himself like he used to in the Bible and kind of appear and save us and do all kinds of miracles? Why don't we have this anymore? And the answer we're learning here is that we are in the diaspora. Okay, what did I mean by diaspora? Diaspora means, sorry, I need to define this. Diaspora is the exile outside of the land of Israel, right? So the reason perhaps why God is not performing miracles anymore himself is that perhaps the task now is for us to reveal God, right? If things have shifted, right? In the book of Exodus, God is, one man show, right? But slowly, God is now moving through us. And this is where God is to be found. In as much as we are open to the divine love and to the divine power, we are manifesting and expressing God through our actions, right? It's no more God doing stuff for us, right? We are, and by the way, you have this teaching powerfully expressed in the Gospels. There is a shift in the Gospels between God being out there to God being within, which is a kind of very subversive shift, right? Which we'll talk about, but very similar. So that's the next step, right? We're seeing here that God is really present through us. By the way, the whole post-Holocaust literature, right? Of which Emmanuel Levinas, if you're familiar with him, is a central figure, right? Jewish philosopher who survived the Holocaust, right? Is talking about this shift from, we can't see God anymore as sitting on a throne. We have to see God as moving through us. And God, in a way, does not exist if we do not move, right? If we do not allow his will to occur through us, right? In a way, God's hands are tied after the Holocaust if we are not willing to be vessels for the divine love. So this is part of the post land of Israel experience, right? It's no more God intervening from the clouds or from a mountain, right? God is still moving, but through us, right? That's the idea here. Stage, you had a comment? Go ahead.
Well, that was a long while ago. Oh no, never mind. I wanted to say something, but I changed my mind.
Okay, very well, Sage. I will respect your desire to remain silent. Okay.
No, it's not that. It was something contradictory that I did not want to bring the class into right now.
Thank you, Stage. I appreciate that. Very well. All right, third point. Going now to the definition of holiness. We didn't talk about this last time, but this is something which is really interesting, which I'll come back to also when we do the Gospels. The reason I keep on mentioning the Gospels is because there are powerful similarities between the mentality of these three goddess books and the teachings in the Gospels. It's interesting. I don't know why no one made that connection, right? But there is a lot of similarity between the worldview, which we'll discover, right? Okay, holiness. Holiness literally in the Hebrew means separation. Right? That's kadosh, separate, right? So this has been the view, right? If you want to be holy, set apart, right, for God, you have to separate, right? You have to separate from, the heathens. You have to separate from certain foods. You have to separate from certain behaviors, right? This is constantly, you have in the book of Leviticus, Numbers, you always have this idea of you are to be holy, right? And therefore separate, right? And so obviously keeping the Moabites out of the community is in line with this definition of holiness. We have to keep ourselves separate from these, pagans, right? Now what's interesting here in this book is that we have a new definition of holiness. Let me explain. Here we have a Moabite who enters, who penetrates at the heart, right? This is not even she's there, kind of on the margins, right? She enters and penetrates to the heart. She becomes the great-grandmother or something of Solomon, of David, right? She's at the heart of the royal dynasty, right? She's not just a foreigner out there picking up sheaves, right? And kind of staying a foreigner. She really penetrates, right? And so we are here actually in what maybe Rabbi Akiva, who said this about the Song of Songs, we are perhaps here beyond holiness into the Holy of Holies, right? I will explain what I mean by that because this is very enlightening. Of the Song of Songs, by the way, Rabbi Akiva says this, right? The Song of Songs is not just a holy book, it's the very Holy of Holies. So what do I mean by holy, Holy of Holies, right? For those of you who don't know, is referring to spaces in the temple. The Hebrew temple had an outer court for the Gentiles, right? Court of women, court of men, the holy place, and then the Holy of Holies, where the only place, right, in the temple where God's presence resides, right? This is the space where God himself is, right? And so when Rabbi Akiva talks about the Holy of Holies, he's saying this is even holier than separation. This is communion, right? There is a holier version. There's a holier way to be, basically. First holy way to be is to be separate, to be distinct, to be pure. But there's a deeper way, which is to be in communion, in connection, in a state of love, right? This brings us back to what we were saying with the Sufis, right? The law will bring you to the gates, but love only will let you penetrate. This is a similar idea, right? The Holy of Holies is all of these, the holies, to be holy is to practice the law, to keep oneself from being defiled, to be careful what you eat, how you engage with people, staying separate. But there is a deeper level, right? Which is the state of grace or the state of love that we are reading about in the book of Ruth. And so we have here a new definition of holiness, perhaps, right? Holiness as love, right? This is perhaps there is an even better way to be, right? Yes, separation is good. Keeping the commandments is good. Making sure we are not defiled or influenced, maintaining our integrity is good, right? But there is an even deeper level, which we are reading about in this book, the Holy of Holies, which is the moment of absolute divine presence in love, right? Chesed. Okay. Any questions on this? I feel like, I hope I was clear. This is a little technical. Anyone confused about what I've been saying? Basically what I'm saying is that holiness, but then there's a Holy of Holies, a deeper way to be holy. To be separate is good, but to love is even greater. That's the idea, right? And if you want a clear image, you have this story. I told you this, right? The story, the Sufi story about the gates of the palace and then you going in. Did I tell you this? Put your hand on the screen if you remember this. Okay, right. Yeah, so I'll remind you, right? In the Sufi, which is a Muslim tradition, right? They say that the law will get you all the way to the door of the palace of the king, meaning the door of God, right? Of the residence of God, but only love lets you pass, right? This is similar, right? The book of Ruth, we're going to see in a second, all the laws are trampled. All the customs are trampled. Because we're on a higher level, right? We're on the level of love. And at that point, you're in a different dimension, right? We'll talk about this. Okay, by the way, for those of us who think that Ruth converted, there's a tradition in the Talmud that talks about how Ruth converted. So it's okay. It's okay that she's there, you know, in the royal line. Actually, the text seems to be disagreeing with this perspective because throughout the text, Ruth is mentioned as Ruth the Moabite, right? Why? It's as though the text is saying, she's still a Moabite. She hasn't merged. She hasn't assimilated. And we want her to remain unassimilated, right? So there's an intention in the text to emphasize the fact that she is unassimilated. She is there as another, right? Complete other. So, yeah, that makes it even more shocking, right? That she's part of the royal line. Okay, for any comments on this, really quick, before we get to the next point? Any comments on this? Please turn on your videos, guys. Sosa, Rubinov, Pierre-Antoine. I'm looking at you. You know that? Vargas. Oh, sorry, Vargas. I know you're. You can't. Rivera, Norena. Faces, please. Thank you. Okay. Any comments on this? No. All right. Moving on. Great. All right. Remember now we talked about the rituals. What was that? Number 4. Rituals. Okay, we mentioned how the sacrifices, right, were the central ritual. How, in a way, the religion was centered around death, right? This was really an important aspect, right, of the rituals of the temple. Central aspect, actually, the only aspect, right? And then I showed how in the goddess religions, right, you have this emphasis on sexuality as being the place where the encounter with God takes place, right? So you have sacrifices as the place where you have this proximity with God. In the goddess texts, such as Ruth and so forth, we have a sexuality or the sacred marriage or the connection between the man and the woman, right? And we have this here, right? In our text, we are going to see how the marriage between Ruth and Boaz not only renews Ruth, not only renews Boaz, but renews the whole community and saves the royal line, right? Which had kind of, was stuck. There was no, right? In a way, the genealogy had been interrupted until Ruth came along, right? And then the genealogy towards the royal line continues, right? So in a way we have here, I hope you're seeing the parallel between this text and the marriage of Inanna and Dumutzi, right? Where the marriage of Inanna and Dumutzi fertilizes the land, right? This is when the harvest can begin, when the rains can fall, right? When they reunite. Remember, we talked about this myth, right? Here it's the same. The country is in a famine. The country is stagnant. Nothing is happening. The royal line is cut until Ruth comes along. Not only she comes along, but she unites with Boaz. The moment they unite, everything changes, right? It's like everything is rebirthed, everything is renewed. Not only the two characters, not only Boaz and Ruth, but the whole land is renewed, right? And so forth. So here we have again this emphasis on human sexuality as redemptive, right? It's not just the sacrifices that save us. Yes, that's one way to do it, right? That's the father's house. In the mother's house, redemption comes through sexuality, through this powerful union between the man and the woman, which we will study, right? The goal of the class for these texts is to study the nature of this union and to study how they relate so that we can relate in this way, right? The goal really is to have all of us become like Inanna and Dumutzi or like Boaz and Ruth, right? I'm interested in these texts in the dynamic between the man and the woman, right? So that we can learn and imitate. And then our union can create this kind of redemption, right? This is kind of the idea in my head, right? As I'm studying these texts, what can we learn from Ruth? What can we learn from Esther? What can we learn from the Shulamit as women? Men, what can you learn from Boaz? Certainly, right? What can we learn? The other guys are not as great, but right, the guy in the Song of Songs, and then the king is even worse. But what can we learn? Obviously, the course is slightly what's the word, slanted towards women for now, but what can we learn so we can create such a union and bring redemption in our part of the world, right? That's kind of the goal. So again, we see here very powerfully, right, in the book of Ruth, this emphasis on the sacred. Please, Taj, keep your comments to yourself when you have something like that to say. I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, last point, fifth. Okay, commandments, right? We talked about the importance of commandments in the Father's house, right? This is really what makes, right? This is the basis of the covenant, right? Is that the Hebrews keep these commandments, and this is what ensures their connection, their destiny, right? As the chosen people. Now we get to the book of Ruth, and the rabbis have noticed this, by the way, right? We get to the book of Ruth, not a single command. In fact, commands are being broken left and right. I'm going to tell you where. So first of all, this very interesting quote from the Midrash. So the Midrash, how is that? Let me just say from the rabbis. Let me just simplify, right? There's a rabbinic commentary on the book of Ruth, and they say this. I'll type it in the chat for you. And then you can copy it, right? It says the scroll of Ruth tells nothing of either, I'll read it first, right? The scroll of Ruth tells nothing of either cleanliness or uncleanliness, right? Neither prohibition nor permission. For what purpose then was it written, right? This is a rabbi commenting in the Father's house, right? And he answers, to teach how great is the reward of those who do deeds of kindness. So this is very powerful rabbinic commentary. So let me write it down. You should copy this. The scroll of Ruth tells nothing of either cleanliness or uncleanliness, right? Which is normally the business of the 5 books of Moses, right? Especially Leviticus, right? Neither prohibition nor or permission, right? This is again the business of the 5 books of Moses. What is allowed, what is not allowed, right? And so this rabbi is observing the scroll of Ruth is not dealing with this. So then he's wondering, why was it written, right? What's the point if it's not telling us how to live, right? For what purpose then was it written? And then he answers, to teach how great is the reward of those who do deeds of kindness, right? So what he's saying, this is found in the rabbinic commentary of Ruth Rabbah, 213. I'm getting a spell check, which is super annoying. Okay, 213. Computer doesn't understand Hebrew. Okay, great. So this is so interesting, because even in the Father's house, rabbis are noticing that there's another path being paved or broken by the, not broken, but opened up, right, by the book of Ruth. He's noticing, this particular rabbi who's making this commentary, he's noticing, wait a second, this book is not teaching like us, right? This book is not focused like us on the commandments, on what is pure, what is impure. So what is the point of this book? And then he realizes, totally different teaching. This book is simply about kindness, right? And he is really showing there is a different path, right? There is another way to do this, right? Which is in a way to follow the path of kindness or chesed, right? So this is really the goal of this class, right? What is chesed? What is love? How do we love, right? If we have no commands, we have to have some guidelines, right? Because it's easy to go around and say, oh, I love you, and then I kill you right afterwards, right? I mean, we have marriages where they love each other and they're destroying each other continuously, right? So love really means nothing today. We don't know. We just see love as an emotion, right? Oh, I feel love, right? Or I'm in love. But we do not really know what it means to truly love, nor have we understood the power of love, the transformative power of love. So these texts, right, Esther, Ruth, Song of Songs, are really texts which are teaching us what does it mean to love, and how powerful this love can be, right, when it is. So there's not a single command, there is a path, right? There is a way of loving which is paved by these books. That's why these books, in a way, are still not prescriptive, but they do give us guidelines, right? I really believe these books are really showing us a path, different path, obviously. Okay, just to quote Eskenazi, she has a funny expression. She says, this is a book about chesed and chutzpah, right? Chutzpah, if you're familiar, this is Yiddish for being audacious, let's use Stajić's term, blasphemous, and so forth, right? So she's saying this book is really not only about chesed, but it's also about chutzpah, which is kind of audaciousness, in your face, no sense of conventions, right? Blasphemous to a certain degree, right? So she's kind of describing the book as that. So not only are the laws not taught, they are broken. If you look, we'll talk about 2 of these laws, right? Which is the law of redemption of the land and the law of the levirate, right? These are two, I'll tell you now actually, so you're familiar, right? First law, and I would say not so much broken as expanded, right? This is what is really taking place. The law is not just broken and trampled, right, in the book of Ruth. The law is broken so that it can expand, right? So let me explain these two laws so you can really catch some of what's going on in the book of Ruth. Law of redemption is found, I think, in Deuteronomy. Okay, I'm trying to write this. This is when you get, so this was for Israelites who became so poor that every Israelite had land, right? Everyone had an inheritance in the country. But if you got so poor that you couldn't make ends meet, you were allowed to sell the land to someone and get that money and survive, right? Now, there was a law that if you wanted your land back, but you still couldn't afford it, a nearest relative could buy that land and restore it back to the tribe, right? Because it was ultimately tribal land, right? So redeeming the land is a way to purchase that land back and restore it to its rightful owner who can't afford it. Am I correct in this? I'm just making sure with my Hebraic students. Okay, great. Thank you, Granik. Okay, great. So this is one of the laws that Ruth invokes, right? When she talks about redeeming. But we'll see how, in a way, that law becomes kind of twisted out of shape, right? In the way that the book of Ruth talks about it. Second law is the law of the levirate. This is the law that when a woman's husband dies, she automatically marries the brother of that husband, so the line can be so the line can be perpetuated, meaning she will get a child from the brother, but will carry the name of the father. So that way, there's no there's no dead end, right? That particular man who died still has a line of descendants through the brother. Right, so the widow marries the brother of the deceased, right? And you have in the book of Ruth a mention of that law, but all twisted also, right? Kind of not the way it's supposed to be. And we'll see how Ruth kind of naively, right, is juggling these concepts. But in the end, it's Boaz who really takes action, but he has to take action by breaking these laws, right? And so we do have, not only in the book of Ruth, we have the indifference to laws, but we have the twisting out of shape of the laws that exist, right? They're broken, and we'll see, in order to be expanded, and we're going to talk about that, right? So that's there's an image that came to mind with the way that the laws are broken in the book of Ruth. And by the way, broken everywhere else in the Song of Songs, in the book of Esther, a bunch of laws are broken, right? I want to give you this image so you can understand what is really happening, right? This is actually an image given by, you have this also in the New Testament, right? You have a seed. Now the seed, in order for there to be new life, what must happen to the seed? Does it stay seed? I'm a seed. Don't touch me. What must happen to the seed before it can sprout, before it can become, living plant? Can the seed stay intact? Obviously, it has to be nurtured. But when you have a sprout, what happens to the seed when the seed starts to sprout? Does the seed remain seed? So every one of you is like trying to take care of the seed. Okay, thank you, Ahmed. Okay, very good. Seed is broken. Right? Seed has to crack open for the plant to emerge, right? My feeling is that in these texts, the seed is broken in order to allow for something higher than the seed to sprout, right? In other words, the commandments are broken in order to allow for chesed, right, to fully blossom. So the seed is important, right, because it nurtures, cultivates the potential for chesed, right, for love. But eventually, chesed will always burst its limits. It will always burst out, right? You cannot contain love into some rigid thing, right? Love is always going to expand. This is the nature of love, is to expand. And so any limits set upon is going to be broken, right? So this is really, I think, what we're seeing in these three texts. Anytime the law is broken, it's not because, they think, this is stupid and, this is old, relics from the past. No, they're saying the law was great because it was nurturing something, it was containing something, but one day that thing has to burst out, and for that, the law has to make way, has to be expanded. So what we are seeing in these books is not so much discarding the law, but an expansion of the law, right? In all three books, including the Gospels, we're going to see, right? I know the Christians make a case that the law is pointless and useless, but what is really happening there is not throwing away the law, is an expansion, right? So that's what I'm seeing in the book of Ruth, in the book of Esther, in the book of the Song of Songs. We have this living plant, right, which has to breathe, and for this it has to burst out of any limitation set on itself, right? Very good. Okay, any comments on any of this so far? I'm going too fast. I'm almost done, and we're almost out of time. I mean, we're not out of time. So any comments? Maybe this will give us some time for discussion. Stage, go ahead.
Okay, I just gotta say about Christianity. When the Christ made a covenant, the new covenant, he didn't mean breaking all the laws or changing everything. He just meant pretty much that what was done is no longer necessary because he has come and he has fulfilled the prophecy. He has done everything that a perfect man needed to do. Just like Adam failed, the Christ came and did what Adam should have done. So the Christianity right there, maybe false Christianity, which I believe there's a lot of, does not nullify the laws of I'll say rabbin. Oh, no, I'm not going to use that. The laws of the Hebrew Testament. He doesn't completely nullify it, or does he say it's nullified in any way? Rather, that that the practice of it is no longer necessary. I just wanted to I wanted to clear that up when it comes to Christianity, because that's not how Christianity should be, and just I don't want to go further into this because I know it might become a huge discussion. We'll talk later, Professor.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think I want to follow up on what Stage is saying, right? What we're learning in these books is the path of love, right? The spiritual path of love, as opposed to the spiritual path of keeping some set commandments, right? Here we have a different path where the commandments are not really relevant or helping, right? And so it's a different path, which interestingly, you find also in the Gospels, right? One of the, I think, powerful subversive moves, right, that Jesus makes in his teaching is exactly the same subversive move that is being made in these texts, right? Let me teach you the path of love, what it looks like. Just do that, right? So obviously, right, it doesn't exclude the other laws. The other laws, in many ways, are teaching us to love, right? But there is another way to go about this. So in a way, this new path of love, which we see in Esther and Ruth and in the Song of Songs, you have it also traced in the Gospels, right? And maybe if you're a man, it will be easier for you to follow in the footsteps of Jesus, right? As a woman, I tend to prefer to read Ruth or Song of Songs. I resonate better as a woman with the way that they embody love. But perhaps if you want the male equivalent, right? Reading the Gospels might be useful, right? If you want the male equivalent of this mother's house teaching, right, of love, you can find this, I think, in the Gospels. I don't vibe as much with it because it's just, it's still too male for me. And it ends with sacrifice and not sex. So obviously, I'm going to prefer the path of Esther and Ruth and the Shulamite. But it is, I think, hopefully we'll get to that when we do the Gospels, the way that he paves a new territory, pioneers a new approach to spirituality, right? Okay, great. So we do have some time for discussion. I don't know if that's a good thing, but let's do this. For everything that I've been saying, any comments, ideas, you want to add things, because I have pretty much covered what I wanted to cover. So anything that struck you that you want to ask a question about or comment on, the floor is yours. All clear. You good? Ahmad, go ahead.
Would you say that the union between Ruth and Boaz is symbolic of her trying to open up the Hebrews and try to integrate other cultures around them?
Yeah, I think there's something like that going on, right? Um, there is really with Ruth the penetration to the heart of Israel, of the nations, right? As though maybe their union would be fecund. This is an interesting idea, Ahmad, right? Let me elaborate on that. I like it, right? The idea that when Israel unites with the nations, you have a kind of sacred marriage, right? And the whole world can be replenished is a really interesting idea, which you actually find in the Hebrew Bible. Let me explain. In the book of Genesis, especially, you have what we call the quarrel between brothers. Happens over and over again. You have Cain and Abel. Then you have Isaac and Ishmael, right? This is the Islam and Judaism, right? Then you have the brothers with Joseph, right? So you have over and over again in the book of Genesis this theme of the chosen and the non-chosen, so to say, right? Or the inner, the one who's in the inner circle and the one who's in the outer circle. You could extrapolate and say Israel and the nations, right? Oh yeah, Jacob and Esau, forgot, right? So Cain and Abel. I'm trying to get the patriarchs in order. Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, the brothers and Joseph. This is over and over again, right? So there seems to be a theme. In this book, it's like you have this kind of peace between the brothers, right? Between Israel and the nations. Why? I think it would be really interesting to think of the marriage of Israel and the nations as something which would bring about cosmic redemption, right? As long as they stay separate, as long as the nations continue to oppress Israel, right? Or as long as Israel continues to push the nations out of its way, right? And say, whoa, we, not you, that we're not getting this, right? So I really love the way you put it, Ahmad. Maybe we do have, maybe this book is about sacred marriage between Israel and the nations and the redemption that ensues. That's a beautiful interpretation, which I think is in line with the biblical text. Very nice, Ahmad. Well done. Okay. Stajich, I think, right? I think I saw your hand. Go ahead.
No, I just thought that the class ended, so I just wanted to expand on Christianity. So I'll wait till the class ends.
Okay. Yes, we still have some time. Anybody else have a brilliant comment to make, like Ahmad? Granik, go ahead.
I guess I was just wondering if you could clarify the idea of like the union between Ruth and Boaz and sort of how that led to like I guess you were saying in the framework of like for like kind of like fertility, sort of comparing it to Inanna. So I guess I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, when we study the aftermath of their marriage, right, you see, and we're going to see this in detail, but you really do see that there is, and we'll get into details, but I'll just give you the main points, right? You have a renewal of Boaz, you have a renewal of Ruth, but you also have a renewal of that royal line, right? In that sense, it's fertile, right? In that sense, in a way, the messianic line is perpetuated. We have in a way jump started, right, the messianic line, the Davidic line. Did you see what I'm saying, Granik? That's one of the ways to see this. So in right, the fact that there is a genealogy at the end, which Stajich correctly, he was correct when he said, this is the father's house taking over, right? You do have kind of the whole story kind of flows into this genealogy for King David, right? But the fact that you have this genealogy at the end with the mention of King David, and I think Solomon maybe also, in any case, he's next, right? You have this idea that she, in a way, dynamized in a way. Without Ruth, there's not, it doesn't go to, David doesn't exist without Ruth, right? She's a great or grandmother, right? So in a way, thanks to her, we have David. So in a way, we do have in that sense this kind of rejuvenation of the royal line. At least that's makes sense, Granik?
Yeah, actually, it just when you were talking, it just reminded me of I think in the Talmud, I think there's this image of either David or Solomon while they're ruling, they have sort of I think it's like they have Ruth, it's like as an old lady, like sitting next to them, like sort of like yeah, like so it's kind of this idea of like they're ruling, obviously like the archetypical like father's house, kind of like the
Yeah.
house of David, but like they're ruling with this like other more feminine aspect.
Oh, I like the way
In
you
mind.
say it. Yes, the story Granik is referring to is the Rabbinic Story, which says that it's actually about King Solomon when he was judging between the two prostitutes, right? So if you recall that story, these were two prostitutes who had both had a baby and they were sleeping, and one of the prostitutes kind of rolled over hers and she killed it. So in the night she comes and she takes the other person's baby. And so then the other woman wakes up and she sees this dead baby next to her, so she exchanges the babies, right? She sees this next baby, doesn't recognize it, and says, "You took my baby." And the other one is like, "No, I didn't. This is your dead baby," right? So they go to the king, King Solomon, and he's about to make a ruling. And it is said that Ruth was standing next to him. She was already very old, but she was present. It would be interesting to interpret this. Since we have some time and no one is talking, and it's connected, let's interpret this a little bit. What does this story mean that Ruth was present at the judgment that Solomon cast between these two prostitutes? If you recall, the way he did it was he said, "Give me that baby." So they give him the baby, and he takes out his sword, and he says, "I'm gonna cut the baby in half, and you'll each have half," right? And then he waits for the reaction, and the real mother is like, "No, just give her the baby," and the false mother is like, "Excellent idea, let's do it," right? And so Solomon immediately is able to see who is the real mother, right? So anyway, we can interpret, what does it mean that Ruth was present? How can we so Granik already gave a really good explanation, meaning that these kings were ruling with an awareness, right, of the feminine, and that's why maybe they were such great rulers, right? We have a beautiful saying in the Tao Te Ching, which is a Chinese philosophical text. I think I mentioned it already, right? The master or the ruler sticks to the female. In other words, is aware of the female, right? Is ruling in balance. There is a balance between the male and the female in the way he rules. So maybe the story is showing how both King David, or especially King Solomon, was wise. Why? Because Ruth was standing next to him, because he had an awareness of the divine, or of the feminine, right? So that's certainly one way to interpret it. Anybody else want to try? Or any other questions? Pierre-Antoine, go ahead.
I'll try and give this a shot, but it may not make sense or something.
Pierre-Antoine, you always make sense.
So I don't know, because like in the beginning, obviously it opens up with like a whole bunch of grief and like sadness, and like because Ruth and Naomi and her other sister and all, like they all like went through grief, and like they know, like Ruth knows what it's like to like grieve in a sense. And I think like I think like what Granik said was like true in terms of like, because like Ruth was there, I'm sure like she must have passed down stories about like her life before, and like she must explain like what her grief was like to lose her first husband. So like maybe knowing what it's like to have a mother's love, seeing his own like great grandmother like have that grief, and probably his own mother like having some form of grief, like he could tell, like just that knowledge of like the feminine mystique, I suppose, is like what that was.
Yeah, and by the way, Boaz, right, if indeed Rahab was his mother, right, it explains also why he was sympathetic to Ruth. And likewise Solomon, right, his mother was Bathsheba, and he was from this line of like problematic women, so he's able, right, to distinguish and to rule. And similarly, perhaps even Jesus, right, from a line of broken women, is able to connect and understand, right, as an insider, the drama of women, right? So yeah, so all of these men, right, Boaz, if truly Rahab was his mother, right, Boaz, Solomon, and eventually Jesus, right, they have a deep connection with the feminine, right? through their mothers. And it's not any feminine, it's a broken feminine, right? They have a connection with women who were on the margins, right? Remember, the mother of Jesus was kind of not in a great position when she got pregnant, right? It wasn't ideal. It was before marriage. We don't know who the father was, right? So we have, right, they have all three men, right, have a connection to the wounded feminine. And maybe that's why they're so sensitive to the feminine and able to be so wise or open and so forth. So yeah, I like that very much, Pierre-Antoine. That really makes sense, that because they are in touch with a wounded or broken feminine, they have a different sensibility. They have a deeper type of wisdom than the average person, right? Nicely put. Okay, anything else before we conclude? Pierre-Antoine, did you want to say more? Go ahead.
I just thought of this. I think we were talking about like how Ruth like is this embodiment of like God in a way, and it kind of made me think back to the Sumerian poem once again. And there's this part I think I spoke about like when we had that discussion on the poem, and when it says like Inanna brought the meh, and then she brought the placing of the garment on the ground. She brought a lore. She brought the art of woman. She brought the perfect execution of the men. So like, I don't know, to me, I feel like that, I mean, there's like a literal like part to it, because like Ruth, like she waited at the foot of Boaz for like all night, and pretty much like, I think she covers his feet or something with like her garment, something along the lines of that. It's my Bible has tiny words, so I don't feel like scanning for it. But I don't know, to me, I feel like because like we spoke about like in Anna, like having this transcendent like into deityhood or whatever, like I think like that also, if you want to like do cross textual references or like whatever, I think that's like another way to look at how like Ruth embodies God.
Yeah, absolutely right. Just like Inanna obviously is a goddess, clearly, right? She is God, but which we don't have in the Hebrew Bible, but we have something similar, right? We have a similar move, similar audacious move, right? To make a woman the embodiment of God, or to make a woman the incarnation of the divine attribute, right? Of the main divine attribute. So this is a powerful move, right? On the case of on the part of the narrator, right? Of this story, which some people believe was a woman, right? Because there's just too much knowledge, right, of the women's ways for it to maybe be like a man. But we don't know, of course. We don't know. Anything else before we conclude? Okay, guys. So next time, right, you will be reading Ruth 1 and 2, and you'll do your reading assignment on that. So I want you to look at, so in the book of Ruth, what really helps, what is interesting, there is a lot of echoes. One expression used in one chapter, same expression used in a later chapter. There's a connection. What is it? So look for words. This is how you should read this, so you can get to the hidden or the deeper messages of the author, right? Beyond just remember the pshat, we have the simple reading, and then we have the deeper reading where the author is giving us clues to a deeper interpretation. One of the ways to find those clues, you see one word. You saw we did this with kindness. Kindness, I looked at it 4 times and then it told me something about what the author is doing. Look for expressions which get repeated, and then what is the author trying to say, right? So there's that. Look for any detail that feels like a surplus, that you don't need this detail, right? The author is saying one thing and then adding a detail that doesn't seem to be important. It's important, right? The author is telling you something. So you want to be attentive to repetitions, seemingly unimportant details, right? Or any other questions that arise. I'm going to be really looking at your questions, which are usually very, very good. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys make of the text. And so we'll have one reading assignment for Ruth 1 and 2. We'll probably have another one in the future on Ruth 3. And then another one on Ruth 4, but we'll go longer. I'm gonna spend maybe 3 days on Ruth 3, it's the center, most important part. Cool. Okay, any questions? I hear a voice. Is this
Yes.
trying to speak? Okay.
No, I was just gonna confirm Ruth 1 and 2, you said, correct?
Yeah, Ruth 1 and 2 for next time. Sosa, you heard that?
Thank you.
Where's Sosa? Oh, Sosa's not with us. He's not going to get this information and I'll have to put it on Blackboard. But I won't. So hopefully Sosa will listen to this recording. Okay. All right, let's call it a day. I'll stop the recording. We're actually out of time.